Welcome to the Chief of the North mailbag on RGR Football. I am Seth Kaiser, Chief of the North, Minnesota Chiefs fan, the man with too many names, father of many, former pastor, current lawyer. I don't know. I just ran out of stuff to say there. As we do every Thursday, I come to you after you bring me some questions about the Chiefs. As you all know, I assume if you're watching this, otherwise I don't know why you would be. I'm Seth Kaiser. I think I already said that. I got my wisdom teeth yanked out last week, full disclosure, all four of them, including one that was apparently fused to the bone, which, let me tell you, was a treat. I chose not to get put under because the local anesthesia was more than, or whatever it is, the numbing stuff was sufficient to where I couldn't feel anything. But I'll tell you, it is disconcerting to have them in like your mouth, just yanking and hear something crack. Ow. So this is going to be a little bit of an abbreviated mailbag this week. As you know, I come every week, like I was saying, to try to respond to some of your mailbag questions. The questions that get priority are the ones that are in the comments section below. So if you put some question marks before, put a question there, I'll get to those first next week, just like I do every week. And then every week I try to put out a tweet asking for a few more mailbag questions. We usually have too many for me to get through. This week it's going to be a little bit abbreviated because we're 6 days out and I'm still in a little bit of pain, unfortunately. But you know what? It's going to be all right. I plan on being in Kansas City this weekend, actually, to attend well, I mean, I wouldn't call him my friend, but I mean, he's a guy that I know. He's all right. You know, I wouldn't throw him out of a moving vehicle. Josh Briscoe, his nuptials are this weekend, and I plan on attending. And I've already informed everyone that if I can't eat barbecue while I'm in Kansas City, I'm going to sue someone. Now, how or why, I'm not sure, but someone's to blame if I can't eat a Z-Man while I'm in Kansas City. Ooh, just the thought of it. We'll get there. It'll be fine. That's 2 more whole days. And so I'm going to get to your mailbag questions. A lot of them are related to the tackle situation still. We talked about that last week a fair amount, but I'll talk about it a little more this week. And we'll just roll right on through. This is my flu game. This is my moment. This is my bad ankle in the Super Bowl and AFC Championship. And we'll see if I handle it with the same aplomb as Patrick Mahomes and Michael Jordan. Early results say no, but we'll get there. All right, let's get to some of our mailbag questions. As we get there, please make sure to hit like and subscribe. Do the YouTube stuff. Support the good people here at RGR Football. They do great work here. I'm here too, but it's more about the work the rest of them do. All right, let's see where we get some mailbag questions. Andrew Leifer, I'm really sorry, asks, they say Donovan Smith played the whole year with a hyperextended elbow. Could that account for some of the shortcomings in his play last year? It absolutely could. And I talked about this a little bit last week, but I'll demonstrate here. Just there's a few different snaps that you could show. But so Donovan Smith is a very upper body centric tackle. He relies a lot. He's got very good size, but he's got terrific length, long arms, and a really strong upper body and a really good punch. He's very reliant on it and how he wins. He is an upper body oriented player, actually kind of to his detriment. And I talked about his film pretty extensively last week. He relies on having more length and more upper body power, getting a good punch, or being able to wrap up and basically freeze guys. With a hyperextended elbow, losing some of that power in both the punch and his grip, I would assume that had a drastic effect on his level of play last year. Now, that's the good news, is that hopefully that'll be fixed, and he'll be, well, not fixed, but it'll be healed, and he'll be better able to operate this year the way he normally has. The bad news with that is it really did display how dependent he is on winning with his upper body and how bad things can look when he does not, which is, that you never want a guy who is dependent on just upper body, just lower body, just winning with his feet. Ideally, a tackle is able to win in a myriad of ways, so he doesn't have weaknesses that can get exposed by higher level pass rushers. That's one of the problems Donovan Smith had, especially against higher level competition who have excellent handwork, who have good power with them because of his lack of lower body power, the fact that he lets his feet get away from them. Guys that were able to withstand that first punch or work their way around it, or utilize some decent moves, they were often able to defeat him utilizing, they basically understood that if they could take away that advantage that he has with his upper body, that he could be run over, could be tossed to the side, could be knocked off balance, and that sort of thing. Ikoe asks, do you think Patrick Mahomes will be well protected as compared to the last 2 seasons? I think Taylor is a significantly better pass protector than Andrew Wiley. It's not even close. I think Taylor's a better pass protector than Brown. And so I do think there's a very strong chance, given that Brown was only okay last year in pass protection, I do think there's a decent chance that the pass protection will be a little bit better than it was the last few years. A lot of it's going to depend on Smith. If Smith is terrible, then it's going to kind of balance out having better pass protection on the right side. And you might see relatively similar results or slightly worse. If he's merely below average, I think it'll be a little bit better. If he's average or a little above average, then I think it could be even significantly better than it was last year. So a lot kind of rides on Smith in that regard, and that's assuming that Toney, Humphrey, and Smith all stay healthy and have great seasons like they have the last few years. But a lot rides on Smith not being bad. If he's not bad, then they really won't have a weak link in the chain of pass protection, and they'll actually have 4 very strong links in the chain, which is rare for an offensive line. If Donovan Smith is even average this year, they have a chance to be arguably the best offensive line in the NFL. They have the best interior in Toney, Humphrey, and Smith. And I would argue that Taylor is a top 5 right tackle, especially in pass protection, where he's probably top 2 or 3 right tackle. So they have an opportunity here to have a really, really great line, but a lot falls on Donovan Smith. And I think, given the commentary we've seen from the team on that, I think that's why they made the signings, because they believe that he can be that average to above average pass protector. This one I thought was kind of interesting. Ryan White didn't really ask a question here, but he says, I had honestly never had a Tombstone pizza in my life till about 2 weeks ago. My parents were always DiGiorno pizza, so I've always been a DiGiorno guy. Well, my daughter and I were at a grocery store a couple weeks back during our weekly shopping, and I thought back to the Tombstone spiel about a month ago and said, why not try the Tombstone instead? Now about 4 pizzas and 2 weeks later, I'm sold good pizza, and it's almost half the price of DiGiorno. Color me converted. Another one, Tombstone, I don't know when you're going to sign me for some sort of sponsorship or whatever that looks like. But, the Chief of the North newsletter, sponsored by Tombstone Pizza, has a really nice ring to it, I think, as does RGR Football, brought to you by Tombstone Pizza. And no one will sell it better than me. But that's just, I just don't understand why you haven't called yet. Buzz Jordo asks, do you think they'll go after a left tackle in the 2024 draft or make a trade for a vet? I think, and I could be wrong here, I think the left tackle group supposedly as of right now, we'll see how things suss out over the next year. Obviously, it's a lot of college football to be played an entire year. In fact, I think the plan is probably to grab a left tackle. I don't think Smith is the long-term guy at the position. And I don't think they'll plan on trading for a veteran simply because they have a number of contracts coming up. They've got Creed Humphrey. They've got Tracy Smith. They obviously just signed Jawan Taylor to a pretty lucrative contract. And Joe Toney is on a very expensive contract. So at this point, it just gets too expensive depending on who you want to keep. But I could very easily see them going left tackle in the first round, depending on how the board falls. And frankly, I think that's probably what they were trying to do this year, but the board just didn't fall the way they wanted it to. Grayson Neely asks, where do you see this receiving core in 2 to 3 years? I think, so much of it, and people are tired of hearing this, so much of it depends on Kadarius Toney's health. If Toney stays healthy, I can see this receiving core being the exact same group of guys in 2 to 3 years. I could see the top 4 guys being MVS, not as the wide receiver one, but a really important role player on the team. I could see him getting a contract extension with the Chiefs, doing what he does, which he has a niche that not anyone else on the team really has. But I could see it being him, Toney, Rashee Rice, and Skyy Moore if the guys develop as the Chiefs are hoping. Do I think it'll happen? It's generally unusual for guys to develop exactly how a team hopes. And so I think it's probably more likely that of Toney, Rice, and Moore, that one of them has developed the way they want and the other guys get kind of cycled out. That's just the reality of the NFL. And so that's one reason why I want to see the Chiefs continue to invest, first, second, third rounders and wide receivers virtually every year, because you can never have too many. There's not like a diminishing returns point with excellent wide receivers unless you get to 4 or 5 of them. And that's almost impossible to get to. And so because there's a lack of diminishing returns there, I hope to see them keep investing in that. Andrew Giles asks, why do the Chiefs not want to get Mahomes a number 1 receiver? Why not extend Jones and get DeAndre Hopkins and win a Super Bowl now, first window? They generally just haven't utilized a lot of assets on older players. And I think that's with DeAndre Hopkins. I think that's the issue. The rumors are that he wanted a new contract wherever he landed. And that's a complete deal breaker. The reason to grab him right now would be that his contract is relatively reasonable given how it's structured at this point. But to give a guy on the wrong side of 30 a contract extension after giving up even minimal draft capital for him just isn't good business with the way the rest of the team is built. So I think that's probably why they went that route. I do think they're attempting to get him a number 1 wide receiver in some of the draft picks, but it's just whether or not those pan out is an entirely different story. One last one from the comments section. And again, if you want priority, comment below, put some question marks in front of it so it's easy for me to see because I'm not that smart a guy. Seattle Chief asks, some friends and I might go to the Vikings game. Will we find you there? In all likelihood, yes. I know that tickets are pretty expensive because the stadium's still relatively new. But that's definitely one that I'd like to go to. My brother-in-law's a big Vikings fan and a good dude. And he and I and then my wife and then his wife, my sister, who is a big Chiefs fan, we've gone to Chiefs Vikings games a few different times together. And so it would be pretty fun to get a chance to do that again. All right, I'm gonna move on now to a few Twitter questions, and then I'm gonna call it a day because I'm hurt. John Wesley asks, I was a little curious about the chemistry between wide receivers and quarterbacks. Just off what I saw last, what it seems like Pat had superb chemistry with Travis, Juju, and Watson. Skyy and MVS less so. Is there hard data to track that, or is it more of a gut thing? I think in such a small sample size, when you've got guys with limited targets, like a guy like Watson or Moore, or even MVS to an extent, I think it becomes a little more subjective. With MVS, I don't know if I would say it was a lack of chemistry. Frankly, Mahomes just missed him on half a dozen deep shots. And that's something that, they'll need to work on together. But the routes that I saw, it wasn't necessarily an issue of chemistry. It was just, deep throws are tough. They're tough to make accurately. And that was one area of his game where Mahomes isn't elite. He's good. He's not elite. Like his worst traits are still good traits. That's how great Mahomes is. But that's something that he'd want to work on would be accuracy on the deep ball. Because had he made accurate throws on a half dozen more plays, MVS has another, 200, 250 yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns, and no one's asking about their chemistry. I do think that, yes, there is something to be said. I don't know if I would call it chemistry in so much as I would say when you've got a great quarterback, if you have a receiver that is nuanced in understanding where he needs to be on the field, and how to read defenses and make adjustments, site adjustments to where the defense has moved, especially against zone. You are going to see more of those instant connection type things, finding those open gaps or utilizing leverage against man coverage. And people will look at that and see that as chemistry. What it really is the fact that it's just a guy finding the open spots with a quarterback that already knows where the open spots are. And so a receiver like that, like say, we'll take Travis Kelce because he's the most obvious example. People talk about their chemistry, and to a certain extent, they're absolutely correct. Those two guys know each other really well. But what those guys know better than each other is football. They both understand where openings are against zone. They both understand how leverage works against man. And so Kelce runs those option routes incredibly well. And Mahomes reads those option routes incredibly well. And so you see throw after throw made before Kelce's even turned around, and people say, wow, they've got great chemistry. And to an extent, that's true. But it's not necessarily about the two guys together. It's about both of them individually understanding football and understanding how defensive coverage works and how timing works. And so either one of them with another great receiver or quarterback who understands those same things would have that same chemistry. So it's more of an individual trait when combined with another individual who has that trait. Then, it creates a great match, and it looks like some kind of, intimate chemistry. But it's really just about the fact that, to use my common quote from Times Ours, they know ball. They know how to play. And that's what you really see there. And so got a young guy like Skyy Moore, because we already talked about MVS a little bit, how I don't really think that was a chemistry issue. With Moore, he's got to work on his site adjustments. He's got to work on where to bend his routes and where to again adjust based on how the defense is playing him. It's hard to learn to do in real time. It's not something you're asked to do in college nearly as much. And so his second year is going to be really pivotal in seeing how he goes. Greg P asks, have you noticed things being done differently with KC you attribute to analytics? I think they go for it a little more than they used to. I've seen a little bit of data on this, and they pass the ball even more than Andy Reid used to. Both of those things you could arguably contribute to analytics, or you could contribute to the fact that Patrick Mahomes exists. I know they utilize analytics, but it's unlike some teams. I would love to see the Chiefs, especially with a season like this year, where there's some interesting question marks out there, like with the wide receiver room. I'd love to see them dive all in on analytics and see how far they could push things. I think we already saw them do that in terms of stretching the field and attacking down the field. I think they tested the limits of how vertical an offense could be. And then now, teams started to adjust, and now they've had to bring it back in. And so I'm assuming that's either a Mahomes-based thing or an analytics-based thing. It just so happens Mahomes' skill set really complements analytics. Another question from Greg P. And then we'll do one more. He asks, can you give us a better understanding of how contract structures are used with quarterbacks? Isn't it true every dollar counts against the cap at some point? How are teams limited when it's done poorly? Quarterback contracts are different from any other position because there's so much more money. And so much more of it is guaranteed. And so technically, yes, every dollar will count against the cap at some point. But how you layer that really affects how that affects your team on a year-by-year basis in terms of bonuses, etc. And so if you are able to spread out that cost over multiple years with various, signing or roster bonuses, you can affect, well, for one, you affect cash, whether or not you're expected to keep some money in escrow, and whether or not the owner has to hand over a check for, $50 million at the beginning of the year. We talk about owners being billionaires, and they are, but, even if you're worth, $5 billion, a $50 million check is a substantial one. And I would just think of it this way. It's not like someone who's worth $5 billion has $5 billion sitting in the bank, right? They have, maybe they have $500 million sitting in the bank, but their assets accumulatively are worth, $10 billion or whatever. But spending a tenth of what you have in the bank is a significant expenditure. And that's just an example, just throwing out random numbers. I'm guessing Clark Hunt probably he might have more than $500 million in liquidity. I don't know, but that's hard to do, and most people don't just have their money just sitting there. And so it's not just about the cap space; it's about cash flow a significant amount of the time, and that's where you see teams play around. You can do more, not anything, but you can do a lot with the cap in terms of bonus structures, depending on how much you're willing to fork over cash. And so teams get limited when it's done poorly because they find themselves in a strap for cash, or because they have done a bad job with other contracts to where the hits all come at one time. And so that's kind of where they can limit themselves. Susan Long, last one, asks, what needs or wants do you currently see in the Chiefs roster? They need another body on the defensive line. They lost, a couple thousand snaps from last year's guys. And after Sean Wharton being back, I think will help to an extent. But they haven't really, they've drafted a defensive end. They grabbed Charles Omenihu. That's great, but they do need another body on the defensive line. I actually really like their first four pass rushers, but you need another guy in the rotation at least, especially when you account for the fact that FAU is a rookie. You know what I mean? So, and then also, but at this point, I don't think there's much to be done about it. The wide receiver room scares me a little bit. Beyond that, it's a good roster. It's a really good roster. And so they don't have nearly the holes that other teams would have. I'm pretty comfortable with them all over the place. We'll see how the safety position plays out. A lot's going to be put on Cook's plate this year. So, but overall, they are a roster without a lot of obvious weaknesses at this point. All right. I appreciate your patience with my quieter than normal voice. I appreciate all the questions. Again, make sure to hit like, subscribe. You guys are awesome as ever. And it is a terrific week to be